Thank you
Hello.
so
Hello.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much for waiting for us. We had a technical issue.
Muito obrigada, nós é que agradecemos esta oportunidade.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Colleagues, we are now about to start. The Honorable Speaker has taken a seat. Let me establish the protocol for our meeting today. We have been graced by the Honorable Speaker, Honorable Carolina Sequeira, the Speaker of the National Assembly of Angola. The Honorable Speaker also serves as the chairperson. The Honorable Speaker also serves as the chairperson of the SADC Parliamentary Forum Legal Subcommittee and also as the chairperson of the Parliaments of the International Conference of the Great Lakes of the region. The Honorable Speaker is known and has been celebrated by many women around the world, and particularly in SADC. During the liberation struggle, she is known to have assisted a lot of women who were in prison, who were in camps, and it is for this reason that we found it fitting that she leads us in this regard. Honorable Speaker, you are welcome. We also have a representative from the United Nations Women's Program, the Program Manager, Specialist on Gender and Security Sector, Ms. Tina Maycanen. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. You are welcome. We also have our consultant, a lead consultant, Ms. Anneke Meekota. The lead consultant has a vast of experience as an advocate working in prisons and also leading litigation around issues of rights. I see our honorable members present from the various parliaments. I also wish to note your presence and welcome you to this afternoon webinar. Honorable Speaker, as you're well aware, the SADC Parliamentary Forum is in the process of developing the SADC model law on prison oversight. This is particularly to ensure that members of parliament pay close attention to what is happening in prisons, places of detention, in particular to ensuring that we can strengthen their oversight role and their work with other state institutions. In particular, the relationship between the judiciary and parliaments, state machinery and parliaments, civil society and parliaments. We have had a lot of consultations thus far, at least about 5, where we met with the Technical Working Group on Prisons, which is drawn from most of our member states. We've also met with health practitioners across our member states. We've also met with judicial officers and national human rights institutions. This morning, we met with a group of young people across the region who were also bringing on board their views on this consultation. Today, now, we are happy to be graced by your presence, Honorable Speaker, where now we're going to be looking at women caucuses and women in general. Honorable Speaker, may you kindly open this meeting for us and grace us with a keynote address. Thank you very much.
A secretária-geral do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC. É efetivamente para mim um privilégio e uma honra poder participar neste importante debate e gostaria desde já saudar todas as participantes que de uma forma ou de outra estão a esforçar-se para tornar uma realidade esta lei. Nós pensamos que ao nos reunirmos hoje para deliberarmos acerca da crítica situação das mulheres detidas em instalações prisionais e analisarem a forma como a região da SADC pode harmonizar e reforçar os seus quadros legislativos para abordar este autêntico desafio, permitam-me desde o início afirmar que se trata de um assunto que suscita uma grave preocupação a nível da nossa região. Como bem podem estar cientes, ainda que dados estatísticos sobre o número de mulheres encarceradas em toda a região da África Austral não se encontrarem disponíveis, segundo estudos recentes realizados na África do Sul, um dos principais Estados-membros da região, os centros prisionais encontram-se sobrelotados, enquanto que se vai registando um rápido e crescente número de reclusos. Apesar da supracitada situação e de acordo com todo o número de estudos levados a cabo pela Reforma Penal Internacional, Penal Reform International, em 2020 e 2021, o número de mulheres sob custódia resume-se a uma minoria, tendo sido detidas na sua generalidade por menos severos e não violentos crimes, em grande parte consubstanciados por condições de pobreza e muitas vezes referenciados por crimes de sobrevivência. Os respectivos perfis, a sua história e caminho levando à perpetração do crime e ao foro do sistema da justiça penal acabam por ser distintos daqueles dos homens. Muitos deles dizem respeito a contextos quer raciais, quer de minorias étnicas, sendo desproporcionalmente afetados por um seu baixo estatuto socioeconômico, por trauma, situação de violência interpessoal, incluindo o abuso físico e emocional e de doença mental, relativamente a crianças, de ordem sexual ou de parceiros íntimos e familiares. Enquanto as normas mínimas das Nações Unidas para o tratamento reservado a reclusos, as regras Mandela, não se referem especificamente a mulheres, a sétima regra faz unicamente referência a uma autopercepcionalidade e identidade do género. Já as regras das Nações Unidas sobre o tratamento reservado a mulheres encarceradas e a medidas não privadas de liberdade para mulheres infratoras, as regras de Bangkok, foram adotadas pela Assembleia Geral das Nações Unidas a 21 de dezembro de 2010. As Bangkok Rules serviram de alicerce para que fossem envidados esforços apoiando mulheres privadas da sua própria liberdade. Infelizmente, desde a adoção das regras de Bangkok, o sistema de justiça penal e as suas inúmeras instituições continuam a ser formulados por uma população maioritariamente masculina, havendo provas abundantes de que as referências às regras de Bangkok acabem em larga medida por serem implementadas segundo uma abordagem a todos os títulos fragmentada, pese, embora, o aumento a nível mundial do número de mulheres encarceradas. Além disso, não só fiquem bem documentadas provas recolhidas pela Penal Reform International e pelo Gabinete das Nações Unidas sobre as Drogas e Crime, 2008, demonstrando que seja precária a situação das mulheres encarceradas, como subsistem contínuas provas de falhas sistemáticas na proteção contra a violência em instituições prisionais e de outras violações de direitos humanos sensíveis ao género, continuando as necessidades de saúde específicas das mulheres a ser negligenciadas e mal atendidas, particularmente no que diz respeito à sua saúde sexual e reprodutiva, à saúde mental e ao tratamento da dependência de estupefacientes. Importa assinalar que o Comitê das Nações Unidas para a Eliminação e Discriminação das Mulheres já estabeleceu que a discriminação contra as mulheres também abrange maus tratos, que as afetem desproporcionalmente, incluindo condições de detenção que não correspondem às necessidades específicas das mulheres, conforme formulado nas regras de Bangkok. Além disso, o Subcomitê das Nações Unidas para a Prevenção da Tortura e outros tratamentos ou penas cruéis, desumanas ou degradantes de 2015 descreveu a preocupação sobre a situação única de mulheres detidas da seguinte forma. Eu passo a ler. O uso da violência sexual como forma de tortura, incluindo contra pessoas do transgênero, a falta de atenção dada e adequado ao seu direito à saúde, incluindo os direitos à saúde sexual e reprodutiva, a situação precária das mulheres grávidas e dos seus filhos que com elas vivam, o incumprimento da regra de separação entre mulheres e homens e a escassez de pessoal feminino de custódia, a prática de revistas que sejam invasivas, incluindo as partes íntimas do corpo da mulher, e o uso de nudez pública, a discriminação no acesso ao trabalho, a educação e atividades recreativas, limitações no contacto com familiares, incluindo visitas de pessoas íntimas e o contacto com os seus filhos, como forma de punição, tendo em conta o que acima fica exposto. A adoção das regras de Bangkok representa um passo importante, dado em frente, quanto ao reconhecimento das necessidades específicas das mulheres no sistema de justiça penal e quanto à introdução de salvaguardas que sirvam de resposta ao risco de maus tratos e à tortura das mulheres. As regras de Bangkok constituem fundamental ponto de referência para os órgãos de controle, incluindo parlamentos, no cumprimento das suas responsabilidades relativamente a mulheres encarceradas ou reclusas. É notável o alto risco que as mulheres enfrentam ao serem submetidas a maus tratos e à tortura em locais de privação de liberdade, não sendo só uma questão que possa ser resolvida ao serem apenas focados locais de detenção. As causas profundas da vulnerabilidade das mulheres em detenção situam-se frequentemente no exterior da prisão, embora essa vulnerabilidade seja intensificada significativamente em locais onde haja privação de liberdade. A supervisão parlamentar de instalações de detenção é vital para se poder manter a democracia e a proteção dos direitos humanos, que garanta a responsabilização das autoridades prisionais e de outras forças de segurança, defendendo em simultâneo normas jurídicas e internacionais, tais como aquelas prescritas nas regras de Bangkok, que melhorem condições prisionais e promovam a transparência e a governação. Através de mecanismos parlamentares como o escrutínio orçamental, a revisão de políticas e o poder legislativo, aos parlamentares cumpre o dever sacrossanto de responsabilizar o executivo, de prevenir abusos de poder e defender reformas que beneficiem tanto o público como detidos individuais, particularmente as mulheres. Assim sendo, e na qualidade de deputada da Assembleia Nacional de Angola, sinto o peso da responsabilidade que recai sobre os nossos ombros de tudo que estiver ao nosso alcance fazer para melhorar as condições enfrentadas pelas mulheres nas nossas instalações de detenção. Se não o fizermos, seremos cúmplices da violação dos direitos humanos das mulheres encarceradas, incluindo aqueles dos seus filhos em condições circunstanciais. Permitam-me terminar afirmando em nome de todas as mulheres parlamentares da nossa região que permanecemos solidárias convosco neste importante trabalho. Desejo-vos, pois, deliberações frutíferas, ficando aqui e assim também lavrado todo o meu agradecimento pelo vosso esforço, pela vossa contribuição e por esta causa que atenua e mitiga os grandes problemas que as mulheres encarceradas ainda sofrem no seu dia a dia. Muito obrigado.
Wow, thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much. The Honorable Speaker is known as the midwife of transformation. I believe that we should appoint the Honorable Speaker as the midwife of the transformation for women in prison. I believe that the issues that the Honorable Speaker has highlighted, situating women in prison within a gender-sensitive framework, is very, very important for this model law. Going on to say we are neglecting women in prisons, and that should not be the case. Members of Parliament cannot be silent, and that where she sits, this meets her disapproval. It also, aligns very well with the call that the model law is looking at in terms of coming up with data on incarcerated women, looking at issues of violations of human rights that the Honorable Speaker is speaking to, and the vulnerability, and she mentioned the vulnerability of key populations and the lack of treatment in this regard. By ending, I really appreciated how the Honorable Speaker focused on the Bangkok rules, where the Honorable Speaker looked at the identity of individuals in prison, focusing on gender justice, making sure that we do focus on treatment and rethink of what we can do around non-custodial measures. This also caught my attention, the issue of desegregated data, where the Honorable Speaker at the beginning indicated that we must look for data that will help us be able to look for these women in whatever shape or form. So thank you, Honorable Speaker, and thank you very much for your keynote address. This has been really a clear rallying call that we get from you, and I hope you'll accept our request that you become the midwife of the SADC model law in prison. Thank you very much. Next, we will receive remarks from the United Nations Women's Program, UN Women, by Ms. Tina McKinnon. Kindly take the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Honorary Speaker, all protocols observed. Good afternoon from Nairobi. My name is Tina McKinnon, and I'm a Program Management Specialist in the Gender and Security sector with UN Women. Thank you so much for inviting UN Women to this important session. I will be focusing on why a gender lens is essential in oversight, common challenges observed in women's detention settings, and key issues that oversight bodies must prioritize during visits, and conclude with what UN Women advocates for. So I'm going to start by saying that oversight bodies play a critical role in ensuring that no person, especially women and girls, experience discrimination, stigma, or abuse behind bars. We know that around the world, women in detention remain among the most overlooked and vulnerable populations, often held in facilities designed for men, under systems that fail to consider the gender-specific needs and experiences. So why a gender lens is essential in oversight. Applying a gender perspective during detention monitoring is not optional, it's a human rights obligation. Oversight visits must go beyond counting cells or reviewing discipline procedures. They must examine how policies, spaces, and staff practices affect women and gender diverse persons differently. This includes considering women-specific pathways to incarceration, their experiences of sexual violence, harassment, and stigmatization, both before and during detention, and also the impact of imprisonment on families, as most detained women are primary caregivers. Now, uncommon challenges that we observe in women's detention settings include inadequate facilities. Most detention centers are designed for men, and women are often housed in smaller or overcrowded facilities that lack privacy and basic dignity. And then on health neglect, reproductive and menstrual health needs are often ignored. And women face also increased risk of sexual exploitation and abuse, often by male guards or through coercive favors. We also know that imprisoned women face double punishment, first by the justice system and again by social stigma after release. They're often rejected by families and communities. Then many incarcerated women are survivors of domestic or sexual violence as well. So detention can re-traumatize them in environments where support services are lacking. And last but not least, women who give birth or raise children in custody face inhumane conditions, and oversight bodies need to do more to assess the welfare of children that live with their mothers. Now, on key issues that oversight bodies must prioritize during visits. First is assess conditions specific to women, so privacy, access to health care, including reproductive and maternal health, mental health services, and gender-responsive infrastructure. Also to engage directly with women, female inmates, and ensuring that they can speak safely and confidentially without retaliation to bring out their views and voices. Then review cases of discipline and punishment to ensure they are not discriminatory. Another point is to evaluate staffing structures. Are there enough trained female officers? Are all staff trained on gender sensitivity, sexual harassment prevention, and trauma-informed approaches? Also need to identify intersectional vulnerabilities, such as those faced by women with disabilities, foreign national, LGBTQ plus persons, or mothers with children in detention. Also to investigate reports of sexual or physical abuse with urgency and confidentiality. And assess whether released women receive support for housing, employment, and psychosocial care. Then moving to what UN Women advocate for. We advocate for dedicating training for inspectors and monitors, so equipping oversight bodies with the skills to identify gender-based violations and understand trauma dynamics. Then, of course, inclusion of women's voices, so formerly incarcerated women, civil society, gender experts must be part of inspection and reform dialogues. Accountability mechanisms, so oversight must lead to actionable recommendations and follow-up. So findings should be public, transparent, and tied to institutional reform. We also need to see safe reporting mechanisms so that women in detention should have confidential, accessible ways to report abuse without the fear of retaliation. And then also invest more in rehabilitation. So shifting from punitive or rehabilitative justice to rehabilitative justice. So education, vocational training, and psychosocial programs for women are essential to reduce recidivism and support reintegration. Then to conclude, I would like to note that oversight bodies are not only observers, they are agents of accountability, and their vigilance can prevent gender-based violence and ensure that prisons uphold, for instance, the UN Bangkok rules. And then gender-sensitive oversight is a pathway to justice reform, so it ensures that correctional system reflect the humanity, dignity, and rights of all persons, and that every oversight visit should be an opportunity to reaffirm dignity, expose injustice, and move one step closer to equality within the justice system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Tina. I think I like how the synergy between what the Honorable Speaker spoke about and what you spoke about. Both of you are emphasizing the gender lens, which should really conform to our human rights obligations that have already been agreed to. You also highlight issues around sexual violence and the gender diverse persons that we find in our prisons. And I also appreciated your emphasis around training, that we cannot do oversight without trained personnel, that as you put it, oversight bodies are agents of accountability and not just frameworks that are put in there. I also appreciated your highlighting the issue of women with children in prisons, because this is quite critical, those who are in detention, where you also went back to say they're survivors of trauma, who knows? And this can just re-trigger. Secondly, that mental health services really have to be in abundance if one has to be able to cope. And I really like where you underline the issue of safe reporting mechanisms. And I'm happy to assure both you and the Honorable Speaker that the position paper does capture and encapsulate these concerns. The burden would be how then the drafters and yourselves ensure that at approval stage, at the level of the Honorable Speaker, the Plenary Assembly, the Executive Committee, that we don't lose sight of some of these issues. And from an advocacy perspective, where we've spoken about the role of civil society and other players, that this becomes the mainstay of what we keep checking at domestication level, if indeed these are taken forward by our oversight bodies that can be put in place. Thank you very much. And I believe that at this stage, we have heard from both the Honorable Speaker and UN Women. I would like to see if there are any questions before we give the Honorable Speaker leave. If the Honorable Speaker is still going to be here, it's okay. We can just allow the drafter to say something before the Honorable Speaker takes leave to assure the Honorable Speaker of the input that has been made and allow the drafter to take over in sharing the framework and any concerns that you have already raised in terms of them being integrated. Anike?
Thank you, Honourable Speaker and esteemed colleagues. And it's very encouraging to see so many members of Parliament attending and taking such a and valuing this process, because I think without your support, we would never have gotten this far. And I think it's your guidance and foresight that actually pushed for there to be an initiative such as a model law on prison oversight, which is really lacking worldwide. And I think as the Speaker and other members of Parliament, this will really set the tone, and I'm hoping other regions can follow suit. I will share my screen just to take you through the SADC model law on prison oversight. Like the Honourable Secretary General have said, the outline for model law is preceded by a position paper. The position paper does go into quite some detail around issues on oversight bodies needing to be gender sensitive and looking specifically at the needs of women, including pregnant women and their children, young women, women with disabilities, LGBTQ women, women who are foreign nationals, and the various vulnerabilities they would face within when incarcerated, and how oversight bodies can then possibly assist to ensure that those abuses are highlighted and that steps are taken to address them. So the model law very briefly deals with sets out certain key principles, and obviously this is not a exhaustive list, but just to highlight in this, our colleagues or the speakers before me have emphasized that even oversight bodies themselves need to be accountable and transparent in the same way that they would ask that prisons are transparent in how they do their work. A key issue is also one of empowerment of prisoners. We know that the women are particularly marginalized within the prison system, and their voices are seldom heard, and they are seldom provided with a space to really raise key issues for them. And part of this is really about how do one ensure that oversight bodies are acutely aware of this. And as the speakers have noted, that oversight bodies need to be trained, need to be gender sensitive, so they can highlight abusive and discriminatory practices as they come across them. There is also recognition within the draft outline that there are specific vulnerable groups who would need some additional measures to be taken during oversight exercises. And this, as colleagues have noted, would include issues around how you create a space during oversight for women to be able to raise their issues confidentially and without the risk of reprisals. There's a focus within the model law on the various ways in which one can improve data, including through creating mandatory reporting on specific issues. We know that in all our countries, there is a requirement that authorities report on deaths in detention, they report on torture in detention, and cases of sexual violence. But these sort of requirements are seldom really lead to tangible data that parliamentarians can use to exercise their oversight. function. So there are big shortcomings just in terms of what we know happens in prisons and how we hold accountable people, the perpetrators of violence within prisons. And this links with issues about how crimes that take place within a prison system are reported and investigated to ensure that this takes place independently and to deal with the vast systemic impunity that exists within our prison systems when it comes to abuse. A key issue that was raised was around the impact of imprisonment, not just on women, but on their families and their children. And the rights and the principles around contact with the outside world, reintegration afterwards, and those sort of things. These are essential, and oversight bodies need to inquire about these. If we look, however, at current prison oversight practices, that does not happen. An oversight body doesn't go to a prison and ask, what are you doing to ensure reintegration of prisoners? So there's a lot of limitations in how oversight happens, and we hope that the model law can provide some impetus to improving that. So just in terms of a brief outline of the model law, and I'm setting the outline here because we would specifically request that if you are aware of specific guidelines and practices and legal examples that could actually be incorporated or referenced within the model law, that you, as it relates to any of the items in the outline, that you feel free to email that to the email address prisons@sadecpf.org. So one section within the model law is about complaints management. And this is really about ensuring that people have an avenue to take not just, well, both their requests and their complaints, and then making sure that those requests and complaints mechanisms function properly and that people's complaints are actually attended to. So this would require that people have the ability to both externally and internally lodge complaints, and that oversight bodies, when they visit a facility, actually assess the extent to which these complaint mechanisms happened, how they responded to, and whether people's needs are addressed during these processes, and whether or not there are any indications of discrimination in terms of how complaints are being handled, and the extent to which all different groups within a prison are able to access such complaint mechanisms and make use of them. Just to note, within the model law, the idea would be to include some basic principles around how request and complaints mechanisms ought to function. And this is not, it's quite a long section, but just to note that the key issue is one about ensuring unbiased treatment, fair treatment, and addressing issues specifically in relation to discrimination, and ensuring that there's no fear of retaliation or reprisal or victimization after people had lodged complaints. And then an important part of this is about how do you make a complaints mechanism accessible? And we know that not everyone who is incarcerated will feel comfortable to access a formal system and confident to be able to articulate what their needs are. And there ought to be space and measures provided for everyone to in fact be able to do so. Then the model law deals with the existing oversight mechanisms that occur throughout SADC, and the model law will try to strengthen how these oversight mechanisms take place by suggesting some good practices based on what already exists within SADC. So just to say, the draft has been based on a thorough assessment of all the laws and regulations that exist within SADC, and it really selected the best practices from SADC and sometimes a bit broader in Africa, so that these are not new inventions, but they lead the way really in how oversight can be handled effectively. So in many of our countries, there's what the law allows for official visitors, and this would include members of parliament. And so the draft deals a bit about what happens with the assessments made by official visitors beyond just them just writing something in the visitor's book. How can their assessment lead to something further? And it's important here that the official visitors specifically include gender commissions and other bodies who have particular expertise who would be able to visit and conduct functions. Then in most of our jurisdictions, there are a very long-standing practice of judges visiting places of detention, and the draft seeks to speak a bit more about what their powers ought to be in terms of unannounced visits and those sort of things, and how they can then take their reporting duties, how they could be follow-up after they've reported on those visits. Then all our countries have national human rights institutions. These are either human rights commissions or the ombud, and within them, sometimes you have a national preventive mechanism as well. Now, under national human rights commissions, it would also include, for example, disability councils or other bodies that are able to visit places of detention. Now, it's important to look here about what their functions are and specifically how they report so that there is effective handling of the oversight. So what we often find is that universally in all our laws, it mandates national human rights institutions to visit places of detention. That exists everywhere. In very few places can the human rights institutions then make recommendations that are binding. And often what happens instead is they write up their reports, and the reports eventually end up in Parliament in a very summarized fashion, and often only after a year, so that it's very hard for Parliament to then use these reports to then exercise additional oversight over prisons. So we make a number of recommendations around how to improve oversight, how to ensure that there's follow-up after prison visits and proper engagement with prison facilities to address the concerns that have been raised. And this then also links to issues of independence of national human rights institutions and the importance of them receiving adequate funding to carry out their functions. In many countries, there are mechanisms provided for in law where there's local visits referred to as independent prison visiting committees. And these either report directly to the ministry that is responsible for correctional services, or they report to an designated oversight body. And here, these sort of mechanisms have been existing for centuries. But the big problem is that they're not properly utilized, because if they were, we would be able to get a multidisciplinary team of people who live within a vicinity of a prison to actually regularly go to a prison and conduct oversight without huge budgetary implications. And it's a much better system than, for example, requiring a city-based human rights commission to visit all the prisons on a regular basis. And one can create ways in which these visiting committees then give feedback to other oversight bodies. So this is an important area where also issues around training, gender sensitivity, composition becomes critical, so that one ensure that these committees are able to adequately address the needs of women and identify that. Then we have independent correctional center oversight bodies. They are not that widespread, but they are increasingly becoming a norm within newer correctional services legislation. And this would really be a body whose sole purpose it is to conduct prison oversight. Just as an example, Malawi is the only country which actually provides for independent prison oversight body within its constitution. In others, it is within correctional services legislation, and issues have come up around the ability of those bodies to do their work without adequate funding and independence. We note that occasionally huge systemic problems in prisons have been addressed by Parliament or a minister or the President forming a commission of inquiry. And the ability to have commissions of inquiry exists in all SADC laws, which is why we're raising this just as another mechanism that one ought to pay attention to. And that can be quite useful if, for example, systemic forms of corruption have been identified that requires proper investigation. We know that health professionals interact with persons in detention, and these health professionals are either employed by the Ministry of Health or by the prison. Irrespective of who employs them, they have certain ethical duties, including mandatory reporting duties, such as under some laws, depending on the country, having a duty to report sexual violence. So it's important for these professionals to be trained and to be able to form an additional complaints and oversight avenue for prisoners, should there be a need to do so. So within the model law, there are some groups that might require additional measures to be taken by our oversight body. So we're not here speaking about what are the conditions in detention, because that is obviously dealt with in, for example, what the speaker mentioned, like the Bangkok rules, which is very detailed around conditions in detention as they relate to women. But it might be that when one come across certain individuals during your oversight function, they might need specific expertise to be able to attend to their and to be able to hear their complaints. So, for example, if an oversight body goes to a facility where there are foreign nationals, they ought to have independent interpreters at their disposal to assist them to hear people's complaints. And there might be various other issues as well. Just to say, there's an entire section within the draft dealing specifically with sexual violence and what ought to be in place to ensure that cases of sexual violence are properly attended to. And the important thing is not for oversight bodies to be the response to sexual violence, but for them to monitor whether the mechanisms in place to address sexual violence are in place and are functioning in a non-biased and supportive and caring manner. So there is a lot really that one needs to unpack as it relates to sexual violence. We know in the case of women in detention, sexual violence are often committed by officers within the facility, which makes complaining about it so much harder. And there might be other mechanisms that ought to be put in place to deal with these sort of complaints. So there are a lot of issues around how one ensure that someone is able to take up issues, and also how people are protected from further victimization and harassment. Then finally, there's a section in the model law which deals specifically with minimum training requirements for oversight bodies and with mandatory reporting, so that one can actually obtain the information that's needed to conduct oversight properly. And this would include, for example, knowing how many women is in a facility, how many children, how many pretrial detainees, but not just this information, but also a range of other information about the prevalence of STIs in a facility, or HIV or TB, and ways that having the data at one's fingertips to be able to start ensuring that prisons are adequately budgeted for and that there's adequate attendance to health services and other needs. And then right at the end, there's a section dealing specifically with the ways in which parliaments can assist to ensure compliance with minimum standards and to monitor that oversight mechanisms conduct their work adequately and that they are supported to be able to conduct their oversight work. So that's a brief summary of some of the issues we intend to include within the model law to ensure that oversight is properly attended to. I'll leave it at that and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Annika. I believe that you've given confidence and blended in very well most of the issues that were raised in both the interventions by the Honorable Speaker and also by UN Women. And we remain open to getting much more input as indicated and learning from most of your jurisdictions. Allow me at this point to also recognize the presence of the Honorable Speaker, Sarah Kangungela Madila, who's the host speaker of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, who has joined her sister, Honorable Carolina Sequeira, to give confidence to this process, and would like to recognize your presence and thank you for mobilizing accordingly, including chairpersons of the various committees and the Women's Parliamentary Caucus. At this point, Honorable Speaker and participants, I'll allow for any questions of clarity or interventions as we proceed, which will be answered. There are members of the Technical Working Group online, including the consultants. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Muito obrigada, senhora secretária-geral do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC, senhoras consultoras e moderadoras que foram muito claras na apresentação que fizeram sobre a bondade do projeto e a importância que tem para a defesa dos direitos das mulheres. Eu gostaria de agradecer o convite e o privilégio de poder contribuir mais diretamente como parteira deste projeto, como foi dito pela doutora Bueno, na defesa dos direitos das mulheres encarceradas. Estou certo que irei contar com um grande e prestimoso contributo, dedicação e dinamismo das deputadas angolanas. Estou a ver aqui duas que estão a participar neste debate, a deputada Luísa Damião e a deputada Teresa Neto, que são dinâmicas deputadas do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC, a quem agradeço pela sua presença e que têm um historial grande de dedicação à luta pela defesa dos direitos das mulheres, principalmente as mulheres mais desfavorecidas ou que estejam em conflito com a lei. Certamente que as deputadas e os deputados angolanos do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC vão ser uma força mobilizadora e um movimento forte de advocacia junto dos outros deputados da nossa região da África Austral, para que nós todos juntos possamos defender a dignidade das mulheres encarceradas e os direitos que elas devem ver protegidos, sobretudo para bem delas próprias, das suas famílias e das crianças menores, porque nós sabemos que muitas vezes, pelo menos no caso de Angola, as mulheres quando são presas, elas levam as crianças, sobretudo as pequenas, as mais necessitadas, que muitas vezes são amamentadas pelas próprias mães nas cadeias. Portanto, eu gostaria de elogiar esta iniciativa e demonstrar que estou muito satisfeita de me terem dado mais essa oportunidade para poder ajudar a melhorar a situação das mulheres em situação difícil a nível dos nossos países da região. Continuação de bom trabalho. Infelizmente tenho que vos deixar porque estamos a preparar a abertura do ano legislativo, do novo ano legislativo na Assembleia Nacional de Angola e terei mais uma reunião de seguida. Vamos contactando com a secretária-geral e podem contar com todo o contributo do Fórum Parlamentar, do Grupo Nacional de Angola, do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC e com o meu engajamento pessoal. Bom trabalho.
Muito obrigada. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We may allow the Honorable Speaker to take leave and the delegation of Angola. Thank you very much. Thank you, Honorable Damian. Yes. Thank you, Honorable Nato. Colleagues, participants online, I would like to start by giving the floor to Sabrina Mahatani. I think there's an important contribution that they would like to make. And then I'll also be looking for hands that may be raised for you to make your interventions. Sabrina Mahatani, kindly take the floor. And also, I think at some point, we'll invite Veronica Sapalo to share the context of Angola, which is in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and it's an honor to be part of this very critical discussion. So thank you to all the organizers. I am a lawyer from Zambia and have worked for the past 20 years with women who are incarcerated across the continent and also globally. I just wanted to add that I hope that there will be some consultation with formerly incarcerated women as you work on this law, and we'd be very happy to help to coordinate this. We work with many groups of formerly incarcerated women across SADC, and so we'd be very happy to follow up with SALC and others. And I can also send some research that we've done recently. We launched a report called From Poverty to Punishment at CSW this year, which mapped laws across the world which criminalize women due to poverty. And I hope that that may also be useful as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that input. It's quite critical. What I can immediately say to you, because we already have some consultations mapped out for October. However, we have a resource. We have a legal officers based in working with the Regional Women's Parliamentary Caucus in the name of Ms. Claire Musonda. I will make sure that Claire Musonda gets in touch with you and ensure that there's a consultation that can be housed in Zambia and the report can be channeled to the consultants. And later on, Annika, where possible, can also join in to look at what is there. I'm also aware that there's a very, vibrant women's caucus, and we have chairpersons, chair of chairs in Honorable Cassandra, who will also be happy to engage in this regard. So please, Madam Claire, be guided accordingly, see that we can get input from this group of women who are formerly incarcerated. I think it's critical. And I guess Anike also will also follow through so that we see where we can plot you along the consultations to add value in this regard. I hope, Annika, you agree with me because I'm committing you without having consulted you.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Veronica Sapalo was sharing in the group that Angola has over 26,435 inmates, of whom 13,965 are in pretrial detention. I think this is something that Annika can relate to because she's been harping on this all along to say, let us look at this thing in context in terms of the data and what it tells us. Veronica, kindly take the floor and share. I think she has probably gone off.
Hello,
Okay, go ahead.
good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I will speak in Portuguese.
Thank you.
Eu estou agradecida pelo convite. Mas queria apenas fazer alguma retificação com relação aos dados colocados. Esta informação é geral
Excuse
e,
me, Veronica,
dado o tempo que
please
nos
hold on a little
colocaram,
bit. Veronica,
nós não tivemos oportunidades.
interpretation, are we there?
Alô?
Okay, may we kindly, yes, request Ms. Sapalo to maybe start at the beginning?
Ok.
Thank you.
Ok. Eu me apresento como Verônica Sapalo, presidente da plataforma Mulheres em Ação. que é uma organização feminina da sociedade civil e que trabalha muito nas questões de promoção dos direitos e defesa da mulher, incluindo as questões de género. As questões que nos colocam sobre o número de mulheres detidas a nível de Angola, o dado que me foi apresentado, aproximadamente de 590 mulheres, eu não posso precisar a realidade porque eu tive a informação apenas na semana passada, dia 11, e o final de semana os serviços que foram contactados não conseguiram precisar esses dados. Eu poderei fazer buscas com relação a dados exatos sobre as mulheres detidas a nível de Angola. Mas o que posso fazer referência é que em Angola nós temos um nível de detenção arbitrária muito excessivo, assim como também no quadro da violação dos direitos da mulher, os serviços penitenciários não oferecem condições, nem tampouco serviços de qualidade que possam salvaguardar, sobretudo, os direitos sexuais da mulher, saúde sexual reprodutiva da mulher, incluindo também os próprios homens. Nós, a semana passada, com o grupo de monitoria aos direitos humanos, tivemos uma análise sobre as vítimas encarceradas, tendo em conta a situação que o país em si enfrenta, mas infelizmente continuamos a fazer ainda investigações para podermos apresentar dados exatos. Mas o que podemos precisar é que nas cadeias em que eu visitei há anos atrás, os serviços penitenciários não oferecem condições de reabilitação dos reclusos. Em algumas cadeias há serviços como, por exemplo, acesso ao trabalho de terra, algumas têm serviços profissionais, mas eu trabalho aqui a nível de Luanda e trabalhei a nível de 9 unidades policiais no distrito de Viana, quando trabalhamos a questão de violência doméstica para atualização do Plano Executivo do Combate à Violência Doméstica, e trabalhei diretamente com a diretora nacional, na altura, do departamento do SIC, e conseguiu-se constatar que as infraestruturas, em termos de assistência, não respondem à expectativa, principalmente das mulheres. Não há salas de atendimento específico para mulheres. Aqueles casos de violência que devem ser tratados especificamente, sobretudo a questão do abuso sexual. As unidades policiais, as 9 unidades policiais que nós trabalhamos, em nenhuma delas tinha uma sala de atendimento. Conseguimos verificar também que, em termos de assistência, em muitas dessas unidades, o corpo de atendimento é totalmente masculino, sem oportunidades das mulheres serem atendidas por mulheres em situações muito críticas. Esta também foi uma das grandes constatações. Verificamos que, em termos de alocação de recursos financeiros públicos para esses serviços, as próprias unidades policiais carecem de meios, materiais, infraestruturas de qualidade, transporte para poderem atender vítimas, assim como também poderem levar algumas diretamente a um posto médico em caso de doença. Estas inexistências foram afloradas no relatório que nós submetemos ao MASFAM em 2022, em 2020, salvo, que ajudou o Ministério da Ação Social, Família e Promoção da Mulher a olhar para a questão da atualização da lei com lentes de género. No entanto, em termos de informação, o acesso à justiça, sobretudo para a mulher, é muito deficitário. Nós trabalhamos muito nas comunidades rurais e a nível das periferias, a falta de informação, a tramitação jurídico-legal, os processos demoram muito tempo para serem atendidos. Também precisa-se de alguma aceleração de justiça nesta componente e ainda em muitas comunidades não há estruturas policiais. Conseguimos verificar agora neste programa do PIM, que é um programa de investimento e intervenção dos municípios, em que alguns municípios beneficiaram de construção e reabilitação de infraestruturas policiais. Algumas nesta fase estão em apetrechamento, mas ainda outras estão em fase de conclusão. No entanto, gostaríamos imenso de continuarmos a trabalhar junto das instituições públicas, mas uma grande limitação e uma barreira no quadro da monitoria para os direitos da mulher que Angola enfrenta é, na verdade, os potenciais parceiros e financiadores que apoiavam as organizações da sociedade civil e, em particular, as mulheres, retiraram os seus fundos e programas de desenvolvimento desde 2015. Significa dizer que de 2015 para aqui, praticamente atividades muito esporádicas que vão sendo feitas e as organizações femininas maioritariamente estão com incapacidade de intervenção. No entanto, a PMA faz parte do sistema da ECOSOC, que é o sistema das Nações Unidas do Sistema Econômico e Social. Nós conseguimos submeter um relatório em 2022, tendo em conta os 4 anos periódicos do nosso mandato, e apresentamos várias questões junto do mecanismo da revisão periódica universal. Também enviamos para o mecanismo da CSW 68, na altura, mas infelizmente não conseguimos participar por limitações financeiras, e este ano conseguimos assistir às recomendações provenientes de Angola com relação às questões que a gente colocou. Um dos grandes problemas, por exemplo, no que tange a violação dos direitos da criança e, sobretudo, o acesso à justiça, assim como também a gravidez na adolescência, tem a ver com uma contrariedade que nós conseguimos identificar entre o Código da Família e a Constituição da República. Significa dizer que o Código da Família permite que os casamentos sejam feitos para os nubentes, as meninas com 14 e os rapazes aos 16, se o tutor aceitar que esta relação seja efetiva, o que contraria a Constituição da República, que ofere que a maioridade só se atinge aos 18 anos. Nós apresentamos essa petição junto às Nações Unidas e também recomendamos ao governo angolano. Na altura, eu fui convidada para apresentar essas questões junto do Ministério da Justiça, após a minha chegada de Genebra em 2019, e na altura o Ministério da Justiça confirmou de que iriam trabalhar no sentido de atualização da lei, sobretudo o Código da Família, para entrar em conformidade com a Constituição da República. E continuamos a apelar porque a gravidez na adolescência, a nível das comunidades rurais, é um facto verídico, porque não há um dispositivo normativo que possa ajudar as organizações a trabalharem na educação às comunidades e informar que essas práticas são penalizáveis pela Constituição, mas que o Código da Família, pelo facto de não ser ratificado, não há esses cheques em balanço para ajudar a sociedade civil a continuar a disseminar a informação de que é uma violação de direitos humanos e essa prática cultural nas comunidades a nível de Angola devem ser banidas. No entanto, desde 2019 até o presente momento, o contexto mantém, a lei ainda não foi atualizada e nós em Angola somos um dos países da SADC em que a taxa de gravidez na adolescência é muito, muito alta, tendo em conta os níveis de pobreza nas comunidades, a falta de acesso à informação, a falta de infraestruturas que possam ajudar, sobretudo as mulheres e os grupos comunitários, a estarem integrados nos processos de desenvolvimento e também as barreiras que nós encontramos em termos de apoio financeiro e também estratégico para continuarmos a trabalhar neste enfoque do empoderamento da mulher. No entanto, são mais ou menos essas informações que eu queria prestar e muito obrigada. Acho uma próxima oportunidade, após termos os dados dos serviços públicos que nós contactamos, poderemos sim enviar uma nota com mais informação a respeito das investigações e a situação sobre as reclusas nas nossas cadeias. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, muito obrigada. We'll also get in touch with you as indicated. The email prisons@sadecpf.org will receive your information and the consultants will duly consider that. Could I kindly invite Honorable Luisa Damião Santos to kindly take the floor?
Muito obrigada, senhora secretária-geral. Obrigada, senhora secretária-geral. Muito obrigada às consultoras. Eu quero, em primeiro lugar, subscrever o que disse a presidente da Assembleia Nacional, que, no fundo, reafirmou o desejo do Parlamento angolano continuar a trabalhar para ter uma legislação cada vez mais humanizante e exercer uma fiscalização eficiente, eficaz e responsável. Nós entendemos que, de facto, é muito importante esta iniciativa do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC, no sentido dos nossos países continuarem a abraçar e apoiar para nós termos, de facto, uma lei modelo sobre esta temática que muito vai ajudar os nossos países, mas, no fundo, a reeducação dos reclusos é um processo complexo. É um processo complexo, mas também essencial para a sua reintegração social, que é importante aqui nós reeducarmos os presos para depois terem uma vida socialmente útil depois da sua saída da prisão. Angola tem estado a trabalhar neste sentido. Inclusive, nós gostaríamos de sugerir também a ideia da criação dos parlamentos virtuais, parlatórios virtuais, que permitam aos reclusos manter contactos com as famílias e com os seus advogados. No fundo, nós gostaríamos de apoiar o bem fundado desta proposta da lei modelo do Fórum Parlamentar da SADC e reafirmar o compromisso que a Presidente da Assembleia Nacional subscreveu aqui e nós nos doarmos também para continuarmos a trabalhar nesta questão. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigada, Honorable Damião. Thank you for those important assurances that you have given. I'd now like to invite Honorable Ruth Mendes.
Muito obrigada, senhora secretária-geral, pela concessão da palavra e também quero aqui reiterar aquilo que já foi apresentado pela senhora Presidente da Assembleia Nacional de Angola. Eu pedi mais a palavra porque, de facto, aqui há algumas questões que a senhora Verônica Sapalo apresentou, que não podia deixar passar. Me parece que a questão da situação das cadeias em Angola é uma questão que todas nós conhecemos, quem vive aqui as conhece, e daí o compromisso da senhora Presidente da Assembleia Nacional de aceitar ou dar as garantias de que, de facto, há toda a necessidade de termos essa lei modelo para também podermos adequar a nossa lei prisional. A outra questão é que a senhora Verônica faz questão, reporta anos de 2019 e 2020 e talvez fosse bom ver atualmente a situação de algumas cadeias, porque há de facto algumas cadeias que foram construídas e que já têm alguma modernidade, que já apresentam algum serviço melhorado. Portanto, me parece que a essa altura do campeonato, em que nós já estamos a ver a proposta da lei modelo, é mais sério é mais curial que apresentemos propostas para melhorar as nossas leis, a lei que nós temos, porque nós temos aqui em Angola uma lei prisional, do que estarmos a levantar críticas de questões, algumas delas até já estão ultrapassadas. Me parece que intelectualmente o debate é mais sério se nós partirmos para esse caminho do que estarmos a levantar problemas e alguns deles até são situações que já estão ultrapassadas. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much and welcome back, Honorable Ruth Mendes. Thank you for attending this session. Annika, I don't know if you would like to just have a few sentiments to wrap up this session. I'd also like to invite Claire Musonda, who's the committee secretary for the Regional Women's Parliamentary Caucus and a lawyer who has also participated in prison activities in her previous life with the Zambia Parliament, to say something before Annika just takes over if she's willing. I don't see any hands, but I also note that we have a few comments on the chat, which will also follow through. Ms. Musonda, are you able to take the floor?
Yes, SG, just very briefly, particularly to highlight the unique circumstances that women find themselves in, given their position in society, on the strata of society, and especially women who find themselves in prison with circumstantial children. It's a particularly difficult situation because what ends up happening is that a child who is not necessarily involved in the crime is getting imprisoned. And it's a very difficult thing for a child to begin their life or to grow up or spend some time, their important formative years in a prison setting. So it really does affect the rest of their lives, and especially if it's not well handled. So the facilities, like you mentioned in my previous life at the Zambian Parliament, we did undertake a prison oversight visit in Zambia. And one of the things that was found was the issue of schools was a problem for the children the circumstantial children who were with their mothers in the prison. So this is one of the very unique situations that women find themselves in, because they're the ones who tend to go in with their children. So I think there needs to be some kind of, because those children are not prisoners, so they should not be treated as prisoners. They need to have certain facilities which will enable them to grow and achieve their full potential as human beings within there. So it's important for legislation to take care of such situations and children. I thought I could highlight that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the consultant will be able to identify with what you're saying. The issue of children seems to be coming through. It was also discussed in other working groups. I'm not sure if she would like to put forth any promise around how she's going to deal with it. The issues of visitations and stuff, I think, have been discussed as well. That was raised earlier. So, Annika, at this point, let me just hand over to you to give your last words and invite members and colleagues online to indeed continue to engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable. I'm very grateful for the contributions made, because it does indeed guide us, I think, in ensuring that there's proper substance within the model law. What I've seen repeatedly emphasized is mental health, educational needs, and reintegration and rehabilitation support. And I think and as well as health services. And these are all areas that are lacking, but that are often not given the proper attention they ought to be given during oversight. And because we know that, as the problems raised by the colleagues from Angola and Zambia, that these are persistent problems, I think it would be important to see how we can try and ensure that oversight bodies have a better children, youth, and gender lens when they really do conduct their oversight. And I think a lot of that would come in to some of the principles that underpin the model law and how we can actually strengthen those principles. Just to say, I think, Honorable Mendes, I really appreciate what you said about us not using the model law to want to reinvent the wheel. What the model law will do is it would have suggestions of how existing pieces of legislation in countries can be strengthened. So if a country has an ombud law or human rights commission law, which can be strengthened to improve oversight, it wouldn't require creating a whole new law. It would be a simple process of just reforming that law and tweaking it a little and adding in some extra provisions that can really close the loop in terms of going from oversight to recommendations to actual change within a prison system. And it's that loop we want to address. And it's really about almost minor changes, but that can be fundamental changes if we ensure that the processes are working properly. So I think also when one debates the purpose of the model law at parliamentary level, I think it's important to see this as a compilation of best practices that currently exist within SADC, and that the idea would be to have as many comprehensive oversight mechanisms who work simultaneously and focus on different aspects. Because you cannot just have one oversight mechanism, because if that mechanism slacks or slows down or doesn't function properly, then no oversight will happen. So we want to really look at oversight from various different angles. But I think what would be comforting for parliamentarians to know is that it need not be requiring a whole review of existing legislation and all those sort of things. That has been done in relation to all the SADC countries, and what it would really be is just simply thinking about where to tweak certain laws to actually improve oversight in each country. That's all from my side. Thank you so much, Secretary General.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. My sincere apologies. I didn't realize that I'm actually muted. But I would like to thank you, Annika, for your intervention. It is indeed not going to be an easy task to take care or into account everything else that we find problematic with what is happening in our prisons. However, we invite you as stakeholders to look at even the post-adoption process where we can develop tools or have programs where we continue to sensitize the necessary structures to ensure that some of these issues do not fall off the radar. And in particular, to collaborate with organizations that are really invested in this area to look at whether we need to look at other avenues or pathways to be able to deal with these issues. As I conclude, honorable members, I don't know if the honorable speaker would like to say something. I'm reminded of the honorable speaker because the honorable speaker of Namibia, I don't know if she's still there, if she'd like to say something, because I know she's passionate about women's issues. I know she has spoken often about places of detention, and therefore these are some of the issues that we raised in the consultation processes to say, do we broaden this because there are other places of detention that will be overlooked from a parliamentary perspective. Honorable Speaker, before I close, I'd like to give you an opportunity to just throw in your insights. Also, having dealt with gender issues at cabinet level for years, I think your voice would be worthy.
I would like to start by appreciating the invitation extended to me to participate and benefit from the presentations that were made today. which I have to say are very, very important. I have asked our colleagues at the Ministry of Home Affairs, that is also responsible for correctional services, to join us, and they are represented here at official level so that they can follow together with us the developments in regard to this SADC model law. We have also notified our colleagues at the Ministry of Justice who would ensure that the Ombuds Office is also in the picture so that Namibia can follow this process and ensure that we benefit from the best practices that are available. We do have these matters dealt with in different legislations, including the constitutions, but we note from the presentation that is made that there are ways that we can improve what we already have, because our experience is showing that even with the best of intentions, there are areas where we have fallen short, and we want to translate the commitments that we have made under our laws into practical action on the ground, so that we don't have detention facilities as institutions just for punishing people. We want a situation where we hold people accountable, but we rehabilitate people and we send them back into society where they can become constructive members of our communities. And most importantly, that when they are in the care of the state in these detention facilities, they are not subjected to any violation of their rights, whereas they are being held accountable for violating the rights of others. So I just really want to appreciate the proposals that are made. There would be areas where we would have queries, but I think that those queries would be handled at technical level as part of the inputs that we would be making. And we look forward to the finalization of the model law. And our desire is actually to learn from what is coming through as the model law is being developed already, to improve what is on the ground. We don't want to wait until the end. We actually want to benefit from what is being shared to improve the situation. Maybe the only one thing that I would want to highlight that I didn't really pick up is how we are dealing with detainees that are detained in countries other than their countries of citizenship, you know, because we have different laws in different countries. We are at different levels when it comes to compliance with these international conventions. How do we strengthen that aspect where countries would comply and we have monitoring mechanisms for ensuring that within SADC, where a prisoner for a citizen from another state is apprehended in Namibia, the country from where they come, the family from where they come is assisted to visit them, and they also have they are assisted to maybe serve their sentence in their own country. That part is what I haven't heard, and it would be interesting to hear what the proposal is in that regard.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We really appreciate. Annika, kindly speak to this. I remember it was one of the issues discussed. And yes, trust Honorable Speaker to ask you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. It's a critically relevant question, and I think it's taking on quite some political significance also, as countries are increasingly requested to accept third country detainees. What we have suggested in the model law is that any oversight body needs to inquire if there are foreign nationals or stateless persons within a place of detention, the basis on which they are being held there. If they are being held there in terms of criminal proceedings, those ought to be criminal proceedings that took place within the country itself. And then we know that those individuals would be subject to the courts and the laws of the country in relation to their criminal detention. It can happen that those individuals had been convicted elsewhere, but because they're citizens of the country, they've been brought back to their country. So then they're simply serving their sentence, and one need to make sure that it's being served adequately. If they, however, were yeah, in other situations, it wouldn't actually make sense for someone from another country to be serving their sentence, except if it is in their own country, and they committed it elsewhere. If, however, the oversight body realizes that the foreign nationals and stateless persons are there under immigration detention, then they need to inquire about various other related things, whether people were able to access consular services and exactly what the laws are under which they are being detained. So we've seen quite a number of alarming situations where people are detained, but they hadn't actually committed any immigration offense within the country itself, but they're simply foreign nationals and they're awaiting deportation. In those situations, the oversight body need to inquire properly about the lawfulness of their detention and the anticipated time within which they will be detained in a prison facility pending their deportation. The courts in Africa have held that indefinite detention in a prison pending deportation would be contrary to people's human rights. So I think it would be very critical for every prison to find out whether there's a legal basis on which people are being sent to them, and then every oversight body needs to monitor that to see whether those inmates are able to receive the services they ought to get. And I think the most critical one is being able to communicate with the oversight body. And that requires interpretation services, and oversight bodies need to have the money to do that. There are some problems relating to interpretation being provided by the prison facility or a fellow inmate, because then people might not be open enough when they engage the oversight bodies around the conditions in detention and those sort of things. Another big worry, I think, is that of stateless persons. Increasingly, people, including children, are being detained in prisons without documentation. And if they don't have that documentation, then their rights are often ignored and they are detained indefinitely. So there ought to be a duty on the prison to facilitate them accessing the identity documentation they need. And I think the oversight body needs to properly track that. So ideally, oversight bodies need to request adequate information of who is in the detention facility, under which laws they are there, and based on those laws, whether they then have received their legal rights in terms of those laws. So I think there's quite a number of issues there that ought to be interrogated. Just to note, and this all relates to if a foreign national is found within a prison. We do know that some countries also have refugee camps, have immigration detention facilities, and those sort of things. One of the questions really for as we go forward with the model law is to what extent it would be possible to include the ambit of all of those places of detention within one model law, because each of them rely for their legality on a range of their own set of laws. And one can then perhaps think of, we start off with the prison oversight bodies and looking at their mandates and duties, and then actually as a follow-up process within the SADC Parliamentary Forum, think about how one develop guidelines and for other places of detention as well. So I'm just flagging that as an issue that might come up. I don't know, Honourable Speaker, if I answered your question though. Are you just muted? Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, you have. I appreciate that. Maybe I have one follow-up question, and that is as to whether this model law also talks to the period of detention for trial awaiting prisoners, because we have talked about those that are awaiting deportation. Or is that something that resort under the judiciary in terms of ensuring that the process of trying people and coming to a conclusion is reasonable, so that those that may not be guilty are not kept unnecessarily detained. We are interested to learn what the practices are out there.
Absolutely. It's an excellent question, Honorable Speaker. So in our view, there ought to be mandatory reporting around the number of people who are in pretrial detention and the length of time they have been in that pretrial detention. I think it's critical for Parliament to know that and for national human rights institutions to know that. But I think it's also critical that that information gets sent on a regular basis to the judiciary, because it's really an indication of the functioning of the judicial system if people are spending long times awaiting trial in detention. And there ought to then be processes that gets put in place by the judiciary to try to reduce the numbers of people in pretrial detention. And it ought to be for Parliament to really ask the judiciary, what have you done? Last year, if we take the Angola example, if there was last year close to 50% of people in detention and pretrial detention, then the following year you want the judiciary to report on what steps have they taken to reduce that huge percentage. So I think there are immediate mechanisms that can happen. So for example, some judiciaries, as a matter of course, require that at the beginning of every session, the prisons report to them on who is being held in detention awaiting trial. And especially if there are people being held who have exceeded custody, legal custody time limits. There are quite useful provisions in some countries in the laws on how one can have those time limits, so that if your trial hasn't proceeded within a specific period, you ought to then be released pending your trial. But that's often not implemented. So that's why it's important for the oversight body to ask those very specific questions about if people are in pretrial detention, why are they there? How long have they been there? What is exactly is the stumbling block? And what we want to incorporate is the example of Malawi, who, like other countries, have developed a very unique system in which when a judge does go to a prison, they can actually order the release right there and there of people who have exceeded the pretrial custody time limits, just so that one don't have this toing and froing without actually coming to a solution. So I think there are great examples out there, and I'm very glad that you have asked that question. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Very much.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I laughed because this is one of the questions where I recall when it was somebody, one of the judges asked, somebody said, that's Interpol, that's Interpol. So it appears to be a very complex issue where I think the model law, like Annika says, you know, to what extent can we get in issues of legality beyond the region? To what extent can we, but there are solutions that have been proffered that I think if we're brave enough to integrate as a region, then they can be domesticated. And issues, I remember Botswana was raising the issue of GBV to say, no, nowadays we have, you know, a lot of huge issues around this, and it may interfere with some of the considerations that may be integrated in this model law. However, thank you very much. I think the matter still remains on the agenda, Annika. We need to look at it in much more detail in this regard. So thank you very much. I think we have reached the end of our session. I would just like to do a few announcements for our partners who are online, to basically say that we need your support to continue, basically to support this model lawmaking process of the SADC-PF. The process has gone through the initiation stage. We're at the drafting stage. Soon we're going to move to the approval stage. After the approval stage, which will be done by a formal adoption of the committees of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, the Plenary Assembly, we will then let the model law go to domestication stage, which is at national level. I would also like to indicate that the stakeholder engagement for prison oversight was thrown around, not limited to the following: parliaments, justice systems, prison authorities, human rights bodies, former prisoners, among others. And we encourage you to also get in touch with us. For some reason, our invitations seem to be getting lost in the system, or we are not also maybe sending them to the right addresses. So please feel free. prisons@sarecpf.org. We will be happy to follow through. I'd also like to indicate that this is part of the consultations. We started early actually in September with the technical working group. We've moved on. We've dealt with health practitioners, we've dealt with the judges, we've dealt with young people, we've dealt with women. We are continuing. Tomorrow we are going to have consultations that are going to be looking at reforms of correctional services. And there'll be one at 10 o'clock in the morning. The other will go on in the afternoon at 14 hours, as we have done today. And this will be shared with yourselves. We have it. If you go into our website, you'll see the consultations that are ongoing. And maybe just to conclude, I would like to say that change of mindsets needs to start from the political spheres among women's groups before it becomes felt in the parliamentary sphere. And we are happy that this leadership by women has been demonstrated by your attendance today. Would like to thank you for coming, and we are happy that we have a midwife in a woman member of parliament, and I'm sure Honorable Speaker of Namibia will be there as well to help us deliver this model law and mobilize the input of women in this regard. Thank you so much, UN Women, Tina, for coming through and really giving us your valuable input. We're happy to receive any technical papers and any support. The consultant remains open. There are a lot of issues that we didn't anticipate at the conception stage. So please get in touch with the consultant and offer any support. She'll be happy to take it with both hands. With this being said, thank you so much for your attendance, and I look forward to meeting you through the various phases of the development of this model law and attending our sessions. Thank you very much. Admin, you may kindly terminate.